The dust of the Texas Panhandle settled on everything, including a man's soul. For 17-year-old Josephine Mayhew, it was the taste of the bitter deal that coated her tongue. She stood beside her father Bartholomew, a man hollowed out by bad luck and worse whiskey, watching the approach of a rider who moved with the arrogance of a king. This wasn't a courtship or a business arrangement. It was a transaction. With a flick of his wrist, the man, Jedediah Kane, slid a leather pouch of gold coins across the table. Her father didn't meet her eyes as he took it. He just gestured toward her, his voice a dry rasp. "She's yours now." The year was 1876. The land west of the Pecos River was a harsh mistress, one that gave little and took everything. Bartholomew Bart Mayhew had learned that lesson the hard way. He had come to Texas with dreams of a cattle empire, but a string of blizzards, drought, and the cursed Texas tick fever had bled him dry. All he had left was a dusty, mortgaged scrap of land, and his daughter, Josephine. Josephine was a child of the plains, with hair the color of sun-bleached wheat, and eyes the pale, clear blue of a winter sky. But there was a fire in them, a resilience that the unforgiving land had forged. She remembered a time when her father's laughter filled their small ranch house, when her mother, before she was taken by a swift and sudden illness, would sing by the hearth. Now the house was silent, filled only with the smell of stale liquor and the heavy weight of despair. The architect of their final ruin was Jedediah Kane. Kane wasn't just a rancher, he was an emperor of dust and cattle. His brand, the Double K, was seared onto half the longhorns in the territory. He was a man in his late 40s with a face like a weathered slab of granite, and eyes as cold and dark as a deep well. He collected things land power, and it was whispered people. He had lent Bart money at an exorbitant rate, waiting like a vulture circling a dying calf. The day he came to collect, the air was still and hot. Josephine was mending a shirt on the porch when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Kane didn't ride alone. He was flanked by 2 hired gunsmen with vacant eyes and gun belts worn low and easy. Bart met him at the porch steps, trying to project a confidence he hadn't possessed in years. "Kane, I'll have your money by the end of the month. Just a little more time." Kane dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and menacing. He didn't look at Bart. His gaze was fixed on Josephine, a long, unnerving stare that made her skin crawl. "Your time is up, Mayhew," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The debt is due. I told you, I just need Kane, cut him off, finally tearing his eyes from Josephine to pin Bart with a look of utter contempt. "You have nothing. This land is mine. Your cattle are mine. You are a ghost on my property." He paused, letting the words hang in the oppressive heat. Then his eyes slid back to Josephine. "But we can make another arrangement." The blood drained from Josephine's face. She understood. Her father had gambled away their lives, and now he was about to wager her soul. "No, Bart," whispered, a flicker of paternal instinct finally igniting. "Not her." Kane smiled, a chilling, humorless twist of his lips. He unstrapped a heavy leather pouch from his saddle. "I'm a generous man. I'm not just forgiving the debt. I'm offering you this." He tossed the pouch onto the rickety porch table. It landed with the solid, sickening thud of gold. "Enough to get you to California. A new start. Leave this all behind." Bart stared at the pouch, mesmerized. It represented an escape from his failure, a release from the shame that choked him daily. He looked at the hard, unforgiving land around him, then at the daughter who was a living reminder of the wife he'd lost and the life he'd squandered. The battle in his eyes was short and brutal. Greed and cowardice won. He wouldn't look at Josephine. He couldn't. He just cleared his throat and gestured weakly in her direction. His voice was a traitor's whisper, lost to the wind, but seared into his daughter's memory forever. "She's yours now." The words were a physical blow. Josephine felt the air leave her lungs. The world tilted the horizon, blurring through a sudden film of tears she refused to let fall. She saw Cain's triumphant smirk, the dead-eyed indifference of his men, and the pathetic broken curve of her own father's back as he scooped up the gold. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. He just mounted his tired horse and rode east, a man running from a crime only he could forgive. Cain stepped onto the porch. He smelled of sweat leather and something acridly sweet like expensive cigars. He reached out and touched a lock of her hair. Josephine flinched back as if struck by a snake. "Don't be shy, little bird." Cain murmured, "Your cage is a fine one." He turned to his men. "Get her things. She rides with us." As they roughly gathered her few belongings, a spare dress, her mother's tarnished silver locket, a worn book of poetry, Josephine felt a new feeling eclipse her grief, a cold, hard knot of hatred. She was property now, a bargaining chip in a game played by wretched men. But as she was forced onto a horse and led away from the only home she had ever known, she made a silent vow. Jedediah Cain may have bought her, but he would never own her. Her father may have sold her, but he had not broken her. She would survive, and one day she would be free. Her new life began on the long, dusty trail to the Double K Ranch, a sprawling fortress that Cain had carved out of the wilderness. As they rode, a figure watched them from a distant mesa unseen. He was a young Comanche warrior, a tracker sometimes hired by the white ranchers for his uncanny skills. His name was Tavibo. He was tracking a mountain lion for Cain's bounty, but what he saw now was a different kind of predator and a different kind of prey. He saw the proud, defiant set of the girl's shoulders, the fire in her eyes that even distance could not dim, and he felt a strange, unfamiliar pull, a sense of injustice that settled deep in his spirit. He did not know her name, but he knew with a certainty that startled him that their paths were destined to cross again. The Double K Ranch wasn't a home. It was a monument to Jedediah Cain's ego. The main house was a 2-story timber behemoth, an affront to the humble landscape filled with dark, heavy furniture, shipped all the way from St. Louis. The wood was polished to a mirror, shine the floors covered in Navajo rugs that Cain had likely acquired through coercion rather than trade. But for all its opulence, the house was cold, soulless, and suffocating. It was Josephine's prison. Cain presented her to the household staff with the same pride he might display for a new prized bull. "This is Josephine," he announced to the stern, fearful housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, and the handful of frightened housemaids. "She is to be looked after. She will want for nothing." His words were a lie. She wanted for everything that mattered: freedom, dignity, a kind word. Cain treated her like a porcelain doll to be admired but never touched with genuine affection. He had her fitted for expensive dresses of silk and velvet that felt alien and absurd in the rugged Texas climate. He insisted she dine with him every evening at a long, polished table big enough for 20, where he would regale her with tales of his conquests, both business and personal, all while his eyes roamed over her with a possessive gleam that made her food taste like ash. He never laid a hand on her in anger, but his control was absolute and far more insidious. He controlled what she wore, what she ate, where she went. The ranch was a sprawling kingdom, but she was confined to the main house and a small walled-in garden. The ranch hands, a rough collection of drifters and hired guns, were under strict orders not to speak to her. They looked at her with a mixture of pity and crude speculation. She was Kane's property, and they knew better than to touch what belonged to the boss. Her only ally in that suffocating place was a young Irish housemaid named Maeve. Maeve had eyes as green as her homeland and a spirit that hadn't yet been crushed by the harshness of the West. She saw the despair behind Josephine's composed facade. In stolen moments while delivering laundry or mending a dress, Maeve would offer a whisper of encouragement or share a piece of news from the outside world. "He's a monster," Miss Maeve whispered one afternoon, her hands trembling as she straightened the covers on Josephine's massive four-poster bed. "Don't let him see your fear. It's what he feeds on." It was Maeve who first told her about the Comanche tracker. They call him Tavibo, the sun in his tongue. Kane uses him sometimes to track rustlers or predators. Says he can follow a trail across bare rock. He's not like the others, miss. There's a quietness to him, an honor. Josephine's first glimpse of Tavibo happened a week later. She was in the walled garden, the only place she felt a sliver of peace tending to a patch of struggling roses. The gate creaked open, and one of Kane's foremen led a man through. He was tall and lean with the fluid grace of a creature born to the wild. His black hair was long braided with a single hawk feather. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple linen shirt, and his face was all sharp angles and quiet intensity. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept the area before landing on her. Their eyes met for only a second, but it was a jolt, a silent communication that transcended language. She saw no pity in his gaze, no speculation. She saw recognition. He saw not the girl in the fancy dress, not Kane's latest acquisition, but the defiant spirit trapped within. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod before the foreman brusquely led him toward the stables. The encounter lasted no more than 10 seconds, but it planted a seed of hope in the barren soil of Josephine's heart. Kane's obsession with her grew more pronounced. He began to speak of the future, their future. He talked of a wedding in the spring of sons to inherit his empire. The thought filled Josephine with a terror so profound it was paralyzing. She would rather die than be shackled to that man to bear his children. Her nights were sleepless, her days a monotonous cycle of dread. One evening, Kane was in a foul mood. A cattle shipment had been delayed. He drank more whiskey than usual, his temper fraying with each glass. "You're quiet tonight, Josephine." He slurred, his voice dangerously soft. "I have nothing to say," she replied, keeping her eyes on her plate. He slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "You will speak when I speak to you. You are here for my pleasure. Do you understand that your father understood it?" He took the gold readily enough. The mention of her father was a fresh stab of pain. Tears pricked her eyes, but she fought them back. "I understand that you are a bully and a coward," she said, her voice shaking but clear. The air went still. Kane's face darkened with a rage that was terrifying to behold. He rose from his chair, his shadow falling over her. She braced herself for a blow. Instead, he grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. His grip was like iron. "You have spirit." I like that he hissed his face, inches from hers. "I'll enjoy breaking it. You belong to me. Your body, your spirit, every breath you take. Don't you ever forget it." He released her with a shove and stormed out of the room. Josephine collapsed into her chair, trembling uncontrollably. The gilded cage had suddenly shown its sharp, cruel bars. She knew then that she couldn't just survive. She had to escape, and the image that flashed in her mind was of the quiet Comanche tracker, the man whose eyes had seen the real her. Tavibo, the sun. He was her only desperate hope. Escape was not a plan. It was a desperate, formless prayer. The Double K was a fortress surrounded by miles of open country watched by Kane's loyal men. To run was to invite a slow, agonizing death in the wilderness, or worse, to be caught and dragged back. Josephine needed an ally, someone who knew the land, as well as Kane knew his own avarice. Her chance came, as they so often do, disguised as misfortune. A mountain lion, emboldened by the dry season, had begun preying on Kane's calves near the river bend at the edge of his vast property. The traps set by his men had failed. Furious at the loss of stock, Kane sent for the one man he knew could hunt the predator down, Tavibo. Josephine overheard the conversation from the top of the main staircase. Kane's voice, full of condescending authority, drifted up from his study. "Find it. Kill it. Bring me the pelt. Your payment will be waiting." She didn't hear the tracker's reply, but she knew he was there. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was her moment. Using Maeve as a lookout, Josephine began to take calculated risks. She learned Tavibo's routine. He didn't stay in the bunkhouse with the other hands. He made a small private camp near the river, far from the noise and judgment of the white men, a place where he could perform his own rituals before a hunt. One evening, just as the sun bled orange and purple across the horizon, she slipped out of the house. Maeve had distracted Mrs. Gable with a contrived crisis in the laundry room. Dressed in a simple dark-colored work dress she had taken from the servants' quarters, Josephine moved through the shadows, her bare feet making no sound on the packed earth. She found his camp in a small clearing sheltered by cottonwood trees. A modest fire crackled, and the smell of roasting rabbit and sage hung in the air. Tavibo sat by the fire, sharpening a long-bladed knife on a whetstone. He didn't seem surprised to see her, as if he had been expecting her all along. He simply stopped his work and watched her approach. "You should not be here," he said, his voice quiet and deep. It was the first time she had heard him speak more than a single word. His English was clear-accented, but precise. "I have nowhere else to go," Josephine replied, her voice a desperate whisper. She stopped a few feet from his fire, unwilling to intrude further into his space. He gestured to a smooth log on the other side of the fire. Kane's men watched the grounds. I was careful. She sat clutching her hands in her lap. I need your help." Tavibo put down his knife and looked at her, his dark eyes seeming to see straight through to the core of her fear. "He owns you, like he owns the land and the cattle. To help you is to steal from him. The penalty for that is death. I am not a horse to be owned." She flared, the injustice of it all bubbling to the surface. "My father sold me to pay a debt. I am a prisoner here. Kane. He plans to marry me. He thinks he can break my spirit and make me his brood mare." The words came out in a torrent of pain and fury. "I will die before I let that happen. I would rather die out there in the dust than in his silk-lined bed." Tavibo was silent for a long time, studying her face in the flickering firelight. He saw the truth of her words, the unyielding strength beneath the terror. He had seen Kane's cruelty before. He worked for the man out of necessity, trading his ancient skills for the goods his people needed to survive in a world that was rapidly shrinking around them. But he despised men like Kane, men who saw the world and everything in it as a thing to be conquered and possessed. "Where would you go?" he asked finally. "I don't know. North, maybe. To the territories. Somewhere he can't find me. That is a long journey for someone alone," he said. "The land does not forgive mistakes." "Then teach me," she pleaded, leaning forward. "You know this land. You know its secrets. Just help me get away from this place. That's all I ask. Once I'm clear of his reach, I'll be on my own." Tavibo picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending a shower of sparks into the night air. He was taking a great risk. If they were caught, Cain would show him no mercy. Yet to turn her away felt like a betrayal of his own spirit, of the values his elders had taught him. The strong protect the vulnerable. One does not let a trapped songbird perish in its cage. Over the next 2 weeks, a dangerous and secret alliance was forged. Under the cover of dusk, Josephine would slip away to his camp. Tavibo began to teach her. He showed her how to find north, using the stars, how to identify edible plants, and which ones were poison. He taught her how to find water, how to move silently, and how to read the signs of the land. During these clandestine lessons, their connection deepened. He spoke of his people, the Comanche, the last of the free bands who still resisted the reservations. He told her of the buffalo, of the open plains, of a way of life that was vanishing like a morning mist. His words painted a picture of a world so different from her own, a world of freedom and spirit that she yearned for. She in turn told him of her life before Cain. She read to him from her small book of poetry, her voice soft in the twilight. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard for the first time in a long time. He didn't see a piece of property. He saw Josephine. One night, as a full moon cast a silvery glow over the landscape, he looked at her across the fire. "Your spirit is strong," he said. "It is like the eagle not meant for a cage." Josephine felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "Thank you, Tavibo." She hesitated, then found the courage to ask what had been on her mind for days. "Why are you helping me?" He looked away toward the vast, starry sky. "When I was a boy, my younger sister was taken in a raid by the Utes. We never saw her again. My father said her spirit was stolen. I see your spirit, Josephine. It is not a thing to be stolen or sold." In that moment, she understood the depth of his character. His help wasn't born of pity, but of a profound sense of justice and empathy. A bond stronger than friendship and deeper than gratitude was growing between them. It was a fragile, dangerous thing, a wildflower blooming on the edge of a cliff, and they both knew that Cain's shadow loomed over them, threatening to crush it at any moment. The escape could not wait much longer. The plan was simple, and its simplicity was its strength. Tavibo had finished his hunt, a magnificent mountain lion pelt, now curing in his camp, ready for Cain. He was scheduled to leave in 3 days after receiving his payment. He would head north towards Comanche territory. He would leave a stolen horse for Josephine, saddled and stocked with a small supply of water and dried jerky hidden in a thicket of mesquite 2 miles from the ranch house. Under the cover of the new moon, she was to slip out, make her way to the thicket, and ride north. He would be miles ahead, but he would leave a trail only she, with the skills he had taught her, could follow. It was a way to help her without being seen as a direct accomplice. Guilt, however, is a poison with a long reach. Miles away in a dusty Sacramento saloon, Bart Mayhew was drinking away the gold he'd received for his daughter. But the escape he'd purchased was no escape at all. Every night, Josephine's betrayed face haunted his dreams. Every morning he woke with the bitter taste of his own cowardice. The gold brought him no peace, only a deeper, more profound emptiness. He heard whispers among the travelers and prospectors, moving back and forth across the country. They spoke of Jedediah Cain, of his power, his ruthlessness, and his new bride-to-be, a beautiful girl he kept like a prisoner on his ranch. The stories confirmed Bart's worst fears. He hadn't sold his daughter into a better life. He'd sold her into damnation. A desperate, whiskey-fueled need for redemption took hold. He couldn't live with what he had done. He had to get her back. Without a coherent plan, fueled by a mixture of regret and alcohol, Bart sold the last of his gold for a horse and a gun, and began the long ride back to Texas. He arrived at the Double K like a ghost from a past life. He was gaunt, his eyes wild with a fanatic's zeal. He didn't go through the main gate. He snuck onto the property, remembering the layout from his past dealings with Kane. He hid, watching the main house, trying to figure out a way to get to Josephine. His timing could not have been worse. It was the night before Josephine's planned escape. She had just returned from her final meeting with Tavibo, her heart a frantic mix of terror and hope. Bart saw her slip back through a side door, her movements furtive and quiet. A few minutes later, he saw another shadow detach itself from the trees by the river and disappear into the darkness, Tavibo. Bart's mind, clouded by suspicion and ignorance, leapt to the worst possible conclusion. His daughter, his innocent Josephine, was sneaking around in the dark with a Comanche. He didn't see an ally, a savior. He saw another predator, another man trying to take what was his. The shame and guilt he felt twisted into a new, uglier emotion, a possessive, righteous anger. The next morning, instead of trying to rescue Josephine Bart, Mayhew did the unthinkable. He walked up to the front door of Jedediah Kane's house and demanded to see him. Kane met him in the study, a look of amused contempt on his face. "Mayhew, come back to beg for scraps. I've come for my daughter," Bart said, his voice trembling. Kane laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "She's not your daughter anymore. We had a deal. I have the bill of sale, so to speak. Now get off my land before I have you thrown off. You're keeping her prisoner Bart, accused. And she's been sneaking out, meeting with that Indian tracker of yours." The words hung in the air. The amusement vanished from Kane's face, replaced by a cold, reptilian stillness. He had noticed a change in Josephine lately, a new light in her eyes he had mistaken for acceptance. Now he saw it for what it was, hope, and it infuriated him. "What did you say?" Kane's voice was barely a whisper. Seeing he had Kane's attention, Bart pressed on his foolish plan for redemption, curdling into a full-blown betrayal. "I saw them last night by the river. She's trying to run away with him. You need to watch her. You need to keep her safe from him." He thought somehow that by turning Kane against Tavibo, he could re-establish his own claim position himself as Josephine's rightful protector. It was a fatal miscalculation. Kane's mind worked with brutal efficiency. The secret meetings, the tracker, the planned escape. It all clicked into place. The rage that rose in him was volcanic. He had been made a fool of. His property, his prize had conspired against him, with a man he considered little more than a savage. He looked at the pathetic, trembling man before him. Bart Mayhew hadn't come to save his daughter. He had just signed her death warrant, and that of her lover. "Thank you for this information," Mayhew Kane said, his voice now eerily calm. He walked to his desk and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to Bart. "You've been a great help. You were right to come to me. We'll keep her safe together." Bart, relieved, took the glass and drank it down. He didn't notice the slight, almost imperceptible nod Kane gave to his foreman, a hulking man named Carter, who stood silently in the corner of the room. "So what will you do?" Bart asked, wiping his mouth. Kane smiled his chilling predator's smile. "I'm going to set a trap. And you, my friend, have just provided the bait." As Carter stepped forward, Bart Mayhew finally realized the depth of his folly. He had not come as a father or a savior. He had come as an informant, a Judas, and in his desperate attempt to undo his first betrayal, he had committed a second, far more terrible one. The last thing he saw was Carter's fist swinging toward his face before the world went black. The new moon provided a perfect blanket of darkness, but it offered no comfort to Josephine. A cold dread had settled in her stomach, a premonition that something was terribly wrong. The house was too quiet. The guards who usually patrolled the perimeter were nowhere to be seen. It felt less like an opportunity and more like a trap. But to stay was not an option. Kane had been watching her all day with a new, terrifying intensity, his eyes glittering with a triumphant cruelty she didn't understand. She had to run. Trusting in Tavibo's plan, she slipped out of the house just after midnight. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves was a pursuer. She moved as Tavibo had taught her a ghost in the night, her path taking her on a wide, circuitous route to the mesquite thicket. The 2-mile journey felt like 100. When she finally saw the dark shape of the horse tied just where Tavibo had promised, a wave of relief washed over her. She was just about to untie the reins when the world exploded in light. Lanterns flared to life all around her, held by a dozen of Kane's men, forming a closing circle. In the center, sitting calmly on his own black stallion, was Jedediah Kane. His face illuminated from below by the lantern light was a mask of pure evil. "Going somewhere, my dear?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. Josephine's blood ran cold. She was caught. "It seems your pet Indian isn't as clever as he thinks," Kane sneered. "But don't worry. We'll be seeing him soon enough." He gestured to his men. "Tie her up, and bring out the other one." 2 men dragged a battered and bruised figure from the darkness and threw him on the ground at Josephine's feet. It was her father. His face was swollen, a bloody gash on his forehead, his eyes filled with a terrifying mix of pain and shame. "Father," she cried out, trying to rush to him, but arms like iron bands seized her. "He came to warn me," Kane said with a chuckle. "Told me all about your little secret meetings, a concerned father wanting to protect his daughter's virtue." The sarcasm was a physical blow. Josephine stared at her father, and the full, horrifying truth of his betrayal crashed down on her. He had done this. He had sold her twice over. The look on his face was her confirmation. He couldn't meet her eyes. "We'll wait here," Kane announced to his men. "The Comanche will come looking for her when she doesn't arrive at their meeting point. I want him alive." Miles away, Tavibo was growing uneasy. He had waited at the designated rendezvous, a rock formation known as the 3 Sisters, for hours. Josephine should have arrived by now. His finely honed senses screamed that something was wrong. The night air was heavy with menace. He knew he should ride on, save himself. To go back was to ride into the jaws of the lion. But the thought of leaving Josephine to Kane's mercy was impossible. His heart, a thing he had always guarded so fiercely, now belonged to her. He could not abandon it. He turned his horse around and began to ride back, not toward the thicket, but in a wide circle approaching from downwind. He moved with the silent patience of a hunter reading the land. He found the tracks easily, a dozen horses surrounding a smaller set of footprints, Josephine's. They hadn't pursued her. They were waiting. It was an ambush. He saw the lanterns from a ridge overlooking the thicket. He saw the circle of men. He saw Josephine bound and defiant, and he saw the broken form of her father on the ground. Rage cold and pure surged through him. This was not just about Kane anymore. It was about the desecration of trust, the breaking of a spirit he had come to love. He knew a frontal assault was suicide. He needed a diversion. His eyes scanned the landscape. The wind was picking up, blowing from the north toward the dry grasslands that bordered Kane's property. An idea, desperate and dangerous, took root. The Comanche called it the red wind, the wind that carried fire. Working quickly, Tavibo gathered a bundle of dry grass and brush. Using his flint and steel, he coaxed a small spark into a flame. He tied the smouldering bundle to a long leather thong. He galloped along the ridge parallel to the ambush site, swinging the bundle around his head until it roared to life. He threw the flaming brush into the heart of the driest patch of prairie grass he could find. The effect was instantaneous. The wind whipped the flames into a frenzy. A small fire became a wall of fire, a roaring, hungry beast of orange and red that began to sweep across the plain, directly toward Cain and his men. Panic erupted in the camp below. The horses whinnied and reared in terror as the smell of smoke and the terrifying glow filled the sky. "Fire!" one of the men screamed. The whole prairie's alight. Cain's face contorted in fury as he realized what was happening. "It's the Indian. He's trying to scatter us. Hold your positions." But the primal fear of fire was stronger than any loyalty to Cain. His men scrambled, their discipline breaking as they fought to control their panicked mounts. In the chaos, Tavibo acted. He urged his pinto down the rocky slope, a phantom emerging from the smoke and chaos. He was not a tracker anymore. He was a warrior. A knife flashed in one hand, a tomahawk in the other. He crashed into the disorganized group of men, his movements a blur of deadly efficiency. He cut Josephine's horse free from the man who held it. He sliced through her bonds with a single swift motion. "Ride!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the roar of the fire. Josephine didn't hesitate. She dug her heels into her horse's flanks, the animal leaping forward. Cain, seeing his prize escaping, drew his pistol. He didn't aim for Josephine. He aimed for Tavibo. A shot rang out, and Tavibo grunted in pain, clutching his shoulder, but he did not fall. He turned his horse and galloped after Josephine, becoming one with the shadows. Another figure rose from the ground in the confusion. Bart Mayhew, seeing his daughter ride free, seeing the Comanche who had saved her instead of harming her, was finally jolted from his pathetic stupor. He saw Cain raise his pistol again for another shot. With a guttural cry of a man with nothing left to lose, Bart lunged not at Cain, but at Cain's horse, spooking the animal and throwing off the shot. Cain's foreman Carter turned and slammed the butt of his rifle into Bart's head. He crumpled to the ground and did not move. But it was enough. The diversion had given Josephine and Tavibo the precious seconds they needed. They disappeared into the smoke-filled darkness, riding north with the red glow of the fire at their backs and the uncertain promise of freedom ahead. Cain, surrounded by the fire of his own making, screamed in impotent fury, his victory turned to ash. The ride was a desperate, breathless flight. They pushed their horses through the night, the smoke and ash of the prairie fire chasing them like a vengeful spirit. Tavibo, weakened by the bullet wound in his shoulder, led them with an instinct that defied pain and exhaustion. He didn't follow trails. He followed the stars, the contours of the land, the whispers of the wind. Josephine rode beside him, her initial exhilaration giving way to a gnawing fear for his life. In the pale light of dawn, she saw how bad his wound was. His buckskin shirt was soaked in blood, his face pale and tight with pain. "We have to stop," she insisted, her voice raw. "You're bleeding too much. To stop is to die." Tavibo rasped, his body swaying in the saddle. "Cain will follow. His anger will be a fire greater than the one I set." But soon he had no choice. His strength gave out, and he nearly fell from his horse. Josephine helped him dismount in a secluded canyon carved by an ancient river. She tore strips from her petticoat, and using the knowledge her mother had taught her, and the skills Tavibo had shared, she cleaned the wound as best she could, with water from her canteen. The bullet had gone clean through a small mercy. She packed it with crushed yarrow leaves she found growing nearby a plant Tavibo had pointed out as a blood stauncher, and bound it tightly. For 2 days they hid in the canyon while Tavibo fought off fever and infection. Josephine hunted, using a small bow, and arrows Tavibo had packed, managing to kill 2 rabbits. She stood guard while he slept her senses on high alert, listening for the sound of approaching riders. In those quiet, tense hours, watching over the man who had risked everything for her, her feelings for him solidified from gratitude and admiration into a deep, unwavering love. She touched his feverish brow, smoothed his hair, and whispered promises of safety she wasn't sure she could keep. When his fever finally broke, Tavibo's first words were her name. "Josephine, you stayed." "Of course I stayed," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Where else would I go?" Their journey resumed, but at a slower pace. They were entering the Comanche area, the lands of his people. It was a stark, beautiful country of high mesas, deep canyons, and endless sky. But it was not the sanctuary Josephine had imagined. They arrived at Tavibo's camp, a small mobile village of hide tipis, nestled in a valley to a reception that was far from welcoming. His people, the Quahadi, were wary. They were a proud, embattled tribe, pushed to the brink by the encroaching white world. To see one of their finest warriors return, wounded with a white woman in tow, was deeply unsettling. The most hostile reception came from a warrior named Moa. Moa was strong and ambitious, a rival to Tavibo in both skill and influence. He saw Tavibo's association with the white world as a weakness, a contamination. "He brings a white eye into our camp," Moa's voice boomed across the central gathering space. "The same people who kill the buffalo, who steal our land, who would see us all dead or on a reservation. He is wounded because of her. She brings death with her." An elder, a wise man named Wounded Hand, stepped forward. "Tavibo has returned. Let him speak." Leaning on Josephine for support, Tavibo faced his people. He spoke in his native tongue, his voice weak but firm. He told them of the girl sold by her father, of her imprisonment by a cruel man, and of her courage. He did not speak of love, but of justice. He said he had acted not for a white woman, but for a trapped spirit, an act that honored their ancestors. The camp was divided. Some nodded, trusting Tavibo's judgment. Others sided with Moa, their faces hard with suspicion and fear. Wounded Hand decreed that Josephine could stay for now, but she was to be watched. She was a guest, but also a potential threat. Josephine felt more isolated than ever. She was an outsider, the subject of stares and whispers. But she bore it with quiet dignity, helping the women with their work, learning their customs, and trying to prove through her actions that she meant no harm. Her greatest solace was Tavibo, who, as he recovered, spent every spare moment with her, a silent, protective presence. It was during this time that the second, more shocking twist in Josephine's life was revealed. A rider, a Tonkawa scout who worked for the army but traded information with all sides for the right price, came to the camp. He brought news from the south. News of Jedediah Kane. "He is a man possessed," the scout told Wounded Hand, while Tavibo and Josephine listened from the edge of the circle. "He has put a massive bounty on the head of Tavibo. But it is the girl he truly wants. He rides with a company of former soldiers, ruthless men. He tells everyone that he is not just hunting a runaway bride. He says he is reclaiming his blood." Wounded Hand frowned. His blood? The girl is not his kin. He claims she is the scout, continued, and his next words struck Josephine like a physical blow. He says her mother, Loretta Mayhew, was his promised wife years ago. He says she ran away with the gambler, Bart Mayhew, the night before their wedding. Kane has a portrait of her. He says the girl Josephine is the spitting image of the mother he lost. He is not just hunting a woman. He is hunting a ghost. He means to possess the daughter to erase the sin of the mother. The world swam before Josephine's eyes. Her mother, her quiet, gentle mother, who she thought had died of a fever. It was all a lie. Her father hadn't just been a failed rancher, he had stolen another man's bride. And not just any man, Jedediah Kane. It all made a terrible kind of sense. Kane's obsession, his possessiveness, the way he looked at her sometimes, as if seeing someone else. He wasn't just claiming a purchase, he was exacting a generational revenge. She wasn't a substitute for the woman he'd lost. She was the ultimate prize, a way to finally win a battle that had haunted him for nearly 20 years. And her father, his entire life had been a lie built on a single desperate act of love and theft. His final betrayal was just the last in a long line of them. Tavibo saw the color drain from her face and put a steadying arm around her. "This changes nothing," he said, his voice a low, fierce promise. "He will not have you." But it did change everything. Josephine was no longer just a runaway. She was the living symbol of Jedediah Kane's deepest wound. He would never stop hunting her. He would tear the entire world apart to get her back. The sanctuary she had hoped to find was an illusion. She had not escaped her past. She had led its darkest chapter straight to the door of the man she loved and the people who had given her shelter. The news brought by the Tonkawa scout cast a long, dark shadow over the Quahadi camp. Moa and his followers saw it as proof that Josephine was a curse, a magnet for Kane's violence. The debate over her presence became more heated, threatening to tear the small community apart. Tavibo, now fully recovered, argued passionately for her, but fear was a powerful poison. Before the tribe could fracture completely, the decision was taken out of their hands. A young boy out hunting for rabbits on the mesas spotted a dust cloud to the south. It was not a herd of buffalo. It was the unmistakable sign of a large party of riders, moving with military precision. Kane was coming. Panic was the first instinct, but Wounded Hand's calm voice cut through it. "We cannot outrun them with our women and children. This valley is defensible. We will make our stand here." The warriors prepared for battle, their faces painted, their resolve hardened by the threat to their families. Tavibo, now a war leader, directed the defenses, placing archers in the high rocks, overlooking the narrow entrance to the valley. Josephine refused to be hidden away with the women and children. She took up a rifle, her hands steady, her eyes filled with a grim determination. This was her fight too. She would not be the passive prize in Kane's twisted game. Kane and his 20 hired guns, a rough collection of ex-soldiers and mercenaries, rode into the valley as if they owned it. Kane was at their head, his face a mask of triumphant rage. He halted his men just out of arrow range. "Tavibo!" He roared, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Send out the girl. She is my property, my blood. Do this, and I will let your people live." Tavibo stood on a rocky outcrop, in full view of his enemy. "She is not property, and she is not your blood. She is a free woman. You are not welcome in this land. Leave now or die here." Kane laughed, a raw, ugly sound. Brave words for a thief. He raised his hand and brought it down in a sharp, chopping motion. The attack began. The valley erupted into a cacophony of gunfire, war cries, and the whistle of arrows. Kane's men, overconfident and expecting an easy victory, charged forward. They were met with a deadly hail of arrows from the hidden positions Tavibo had prepared. Horses screamed and fell. Men cried out and tumbled from their saddles. The charge faltered, breaking against the Comanche's disciplined defense. The battle raged for hours. Kane's men had superior firepower, but the Comanche had knowledge of the terrain and a desperate courage. Josephine fought alongside them. She was a surprisingly good shot, her focus absolute. Each bullet she fired was a reclamation of her own life. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. She was a warrior. During a lull in the fighting as the sun began to set, a new figure appeared on the ridge. He was a silhouette against the blood-red sky, a lone rider on a tired horse. As he came closer, Josephine's heart stopped. It was her father. Bart Mayhew was not the broken man she had last seen. He was alive, though barely. Carter's blow had nearly killed him, but he had been left for dead and had managed to crawl away. He had followed Kane's party from a distance, driven by a final desperate need to do one right thing in his miserable life. He rode not towards the Comanche, but directly towards Kane's line. "Kane!" he shouted, his voice hoarse and cracking. Kane turned his face, twisting in disbelief and fury. "Mayhew, I should have killed you myself." "It's me you want, Kane." Bart yelled, pulling his horse to a stop. "It was always me. I took her. Loretta, she chose me. She never loved you. She ran from you because you were a monster. Then, just as you are now." He was baiting him, drawing all the hatred, all the decades of festering obsession onto himself. For the first time in his life, he was acting as a shield for his daughter. "Josephine is my daughter. Mine, not yours." He screamed, pulling his pistol. "And you will never have her." He fired a single wild shot in Kane's direction. It was a suicidal act, and he knew it. It was his confession, his apology, and his redemption, all in one. Kane's men reacted instantly, riddling Bart with a volley of rifle fire. He was thrown from his saddle dead before he hit the ground. The senseless public execution of an unarmed man shocked even Kane's hardened mercenaries. But for Kane, it was the final trigger. His face was a mask of pure madness. Loretta, Bart, Josephine, it all blended into a single burning point of rage. "Kill them all!" he shrieked, spurring his horse forward in a mad solo charge. Tavibo met him. It was not a battle of guns, but something more ancient. They crashed together, both men falling from their horses. They rolled in the dust, a tangle of limbs, knives flashing. Kane was bigger, stronger, fueled by a madman's rage. But Tavibo was quicker, a warrior defending his home and the woman he loved. Josephine saw her chance. While all eyes were on the two fighting leaders, she scrambled down the rocks, circling around the main fray. She saw Kane gain the upper hand, his knife raised over a struggling Tavibo. She raised her rifle, but the two men were a tangled, moving mass. She couldn't get a clear shot. So she did what Tavibo had taught her. She used her head. She saw Kane's horse, riderless, and panicked nearby. She grabbed a burning branch from a fire and slapped the horse hard on the flank. The terrified animal screamed and bolted, careening directly into the two fighting men. The horse's wild kick caught Kane squarely in the side, sending him flying. His knife clattered away. Tavibo was on his feet in an instant, but he did not kill the disarmed man. He stood back, his chest heaving. The fight was over. Kane's men, seeing their leader defeated and their resolve broken, began to fall back, melting away into the dusk. Kane struggled to his feet, clutching his ribs, his eyes wild with disbelief. He was beaten. He looked at Josephine standing there, rifle in hand, her face hard and unforgiving. He looked at Tavibo, the man who had taken everything from him, just as her father had. He started to laugh, a horrible gurgling sound. "You think you've won," he spat at Josephine. "You'll never be free of me. You have my curse in your blood." With a final desperate surge of energy, he lunged for his dropped knife. He never reached it. An arrow fired by Moa from the rocks above took him clean in the chest. Jedediah Cain, the emperor of dust and cattle, fell face first into the Texas dirt and lay still. A quiet fell over the valley, broken only by the whisper of the wind. The dust settled. Cain was gone. Her father was gone. Josephine stood between two worlds. The one she was born into had betrayed and sold her. The one that had saved her was not truly hers. Tavibo came to her side, his hand finding hers. He did not say anything. He just looked at her, his dark eyes, asking the unspoken question. She looked at her father's body, feeling a profound, aching sorrow, not for the man who had sold her, but for the man he could have been. Then she looked at the faces of the Comanche, who now watched her not with suspicion, but with a hard-won respect. She looked at Tavibo, her protector, her teacher, her love. Her old life was a ghost. Her future was an unwritten page. Here with him, she was not property. She was not a prisoner. She was just Josephine. And she was free. "I'm home," she whispered, squeezing his hand. Together they turned and walked back into the heart of the camp, two survivors, two lovers ready to build a new world of their own in the twilight of the old one. That wild, untamed land was built on stories of loss, survival, and the fierce, defiant beating of the human heart. Josephine's journey wasn't just an escape from a gilded cage. It was a profound discovery of self, a story of how love can bloom in the harshest of soils, and how true freedom isn't about the land you stand on, but the person you choose to stand with. It's a testament to the fact that even when the world tries to define you, to own you, your spirit can remain unbreakable. Her father sold her, but her life became her own to claim. If this story of love, betrayal, and redemption in the Old West moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring more historical dramas like this to life. Don't forget to share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss our next journey into the past. Thank you for listening.